want to take a look at the Pacific Ocean. It's a huge driver of our weather here in the U.S. And so it's a part of the world that we really have to focus and really kind of try to pay attention to. Now we just I think we just left La Nina and we're back in neutral again now. I think I read that actually this week. I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but we've been in a very weak La Nina. And what's different from past years really has been more about the swing in the La Nina or the El Nino. So last year we had this just violent swing from a strong to another medium or strong as well. Whereas this year we've kind of just been meandering in this neutral and weak phase, and a lot of times that indicates a lot of times it actually trends more towards less severe weather in the U.S. When we're not having this violent swing. And think about weather, right? Like when our weather is the worst, that is when we have this violent swing in our activity. So we're seeing things that are like, a big cold front that comes in. Like if the stronger the cold front, usually the worse the weather is along that cold front. The stronger the warm front, the worse the weather is on that warm front. And that's typically how we get to um, really, really bad weather is having these big swings. But what we've noticed is, and John, I think you really pointed this out when we were, going through trying to produce our forecast, is that cold pocket that's up by Alaska, and that's called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. But it's essentially telling us that we've got this cold area, and that a lot of times leads to more severe weather. And what we've noticed, which we're kind of in an unusual pattern, is that it's made the weather in the U.S. Behave closer to a medium or a strong La Nina. And we've seen that with some of the weather that we've noticed, right? Some of the wildfire issues. Honestly, some of how violent some of these storms have been, like with the dry and the wind behind them. Um, Really, really typical in a La Nina type pattern where you get on average warmer than usual most places, but when it does get cold, it tends to get really cold. So the extremes in a La Nina pattern are usually more, whereas in an El Nino pattern, the extremes aren't quite as big. And so we've kind of seen that. And so what does that mean for us in our weather? Well, when we kind of go through now this isn't the end all be all, right? This isn't saying, okay, we got black red squares, that means there's going to be lots of hail in those locations. But what this does mean is that these and it's interesting, right? If you're thinking about the weather that we've had so far, right? And you're looking at this map and you're like, okay, okay, I see you, right? And that's because the weather is patterns, right? But this is telling us what our outbreak potential is. Okay,
for the month of
so it
April.
could be. Go ahead, John.
For the month of it, this one's specifically the month of April shown
For
here.
the month of April, right? So,
Yeah.
and I would say you can kind of like flip flop that on either side. So May or March, like the patterns don't really swing a whole lot. But if you look at March, right? Now we're gonna see the western part of this kick in as we get into April and May. But the eastern portion, right? The Tennessee, the Arkansas, the Kentucky, the Illinois part of this, that's typically we're going to see that in March, and that's exactly what we've seen so far this year. And I think when I disconnected, what I was wanting to say was all of this forecast was put together almost 3 months ago. Okay, so a lot of the stuff that we're going, wow, look, this is exactly what's happening, was forecasted 3 months ago. And that's what's so incredible about really recognizing these patterns and then understanding what impact they're going to have on our weather. And so as we go through, we want to look at different years that have different patterns. And 2001 was one that really stood out. John, I think you found this pattern match, right? Or it's the closest that we could get, or one of the closest that we could get. And we had 1976, which it's a long time ago, really difficult to know. There might be a few people in here or watching that remember the weather from 1976, or at least they think they remember the weather from 1976. Um, but overall, 2001 was an above average year. And so It was slightly above average, but it was an above average year. We also had one of the most historic hailstorms in U.S. history. At the time, I did over $1.5 billion in damage, which is incredible if you think about 2001. Um, but Essentially, what happened in this period, we went La Nina into a neutral phase, and then eventually went into an El Nino as well. And so that's kind of what we had.